Some might say the Kia EV3 is a direct replacement to the Soul EV, which has now been discontinued and was on sale for over 10 years. However, the manufacturers assured me that's not the case. Nonetheless, this is the automaker's first fully electric compact SUV, indeed complementing the rest of the fully electric lineup from the South Korean manufacturer. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it's available in 3 trims. You've got the Air with 2 different battery packs, the GT line and the GT line S. They're also all available with a front-wheel drive configuration, although I've been told that at a later date there'll be an all-wheel drive alternative as well. Now, in terms of the overall price point, it starts from £33,000. Add a bigger battery pack to the Airline and it goes up to £36,000. The GT line comes in at £39,500 and the GT Line S at £43,000. Disappointingly, if you do want to add a heat pump to any of the models, you'll have to go for the top spec GT Line S and splash out an additional £900. And we'll be touching upon that very shortly. In terms of your warranty, you have got 7 years on the vehicle itself, or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first, 5 years on the paint, and 12 years for anti-perforation. You've also got 8-year warranty on the motor and the battery. And it's also worth considering that the warranty is also transferable, which is good in terms of the second-hand market. Now, with all that in mind, we're going to see if the Kia EV3 is actually worth its price tag, and of course, how it compares to some of its key competitors. So let us start off and talk about its electric range. And yes, indeed, in the entry-level Air trim, you've got 2 battery pack capacities, 58.3 kilowatt hour and 81.4 kilowatt hour. The larger battery pack is solely available in the GT line and the GT Line S models. Now, in terms of the WLTP claim, at least from the mixed driving cycle, it sits between 270 to 345 miles. Of course, it depends as to which model you go for. And if you were to go for the city cycle, then of course you can get much larger claims, which the manufacturers actually cleverly use for marketing on their website. Now, from my own mixed driving test, driving the GT Line S with the heat pump included, I netted 240 to 260 miles. Now, that's not too bad in the grander scheme of things, specifically if you look at the mileage leaderboard. However, in comparison to some of its key competitors, including even some of the other vehicles that are offered from the Hyundai Motor Group, it doesn't exactly stand out. Indeed, over here I'm considering the likes of the Kia Niro EV, the Kia e-Niro that came before it, the Hyundai Kona Electric, be it the first or second generation model, or even the Kia Soul EV. Now, bearing in mind that all these vehicles actually netted roughly 260 miles and also had a smaller battery pack, it does leave your head scratching a little bit to think why that the EV3 didn't net a better electric range, especially considering that it's been built from the ground up as an electric vehicle, unlike its alternatives out there that have a shared platform. Now, I would also like to re-emphasize that I'm disappointed that Kia have not included a heat pump across the entire trim range, and at the very least not even offered it as an option across the entire trim range. See, if you do want it, you'll have to go for the top spec GT Line S model and then splash out an additional £900. As a reminder, again, it's been fitted on this press vehicle, but in this day and age and for a modern electric vehicle, I would include it as standard, and therefore it is a little bit disheartening to say the least. Now, what I really do love, however, is the fact that you've got a multitude of customization options when it comes to regenerative braking. Now, right now I'm on I-pedal mode, which allows for full 1-pedal driving, and I'm on level 3 mode, which is the harshest mode. If I were to lift off the accelerator pedal at roughly 30 miles an hour, the vehicle will come to a complete standstill. Now, it's worth pointing out over here that via the paddle shifters, you can actually customize the regenerative braking feel while on the fly. So, for example, on level 3 mode, I can go to level 2, level 1, or level 0. I can also hold down the right side paddle shifter and go on auto mode, and therefore it'll automatically determine what's best for you while you're driving. You can also customize what level of regenerative braking you want in auto mode via the infotainment system. And just as an extension to all of that, you've also got the I-pedal mode. Now, the I-pedal mode gives you the ability of driving with 1 pedal only, specifically when you're on the harshest regenerative braking mode. But what I do find intriguing, unlike previous generation models, is that the I-pedal mode can be used simultaneously with the level 0, level 1 and level 2 modes as well. Now, it might take quite a while before you can actually come to a complete standstill in these modes, but having experimented with it, so for example, if I were to just slow down and drive at, let's say, 10 miles an hour without I-pedal mode, the vehicle will continue rolling. Whereas if I were to enable it, even on level 1 mode, the vehicle will suddenly determine, oh, I'm in I-pedal mode, and I'll come to a complete standstill. A small little touch by Kia, but something that I absolutely love. Furthermore, it's absolutely fantastic to see that iPedal mode also retains the last used mode. In other words, when you were to power off the vehicle and power it on again, iPedal mode is retained, which isn't the same case that could have been said with the previous generation models. So Kia have clearly been listening to its customers, including reviewers like myself, because that's something I actually pointed out when I reviewed the previous generation Kia and Hyundai models. Now, aside from recouping energy while on the move, you can also plug it in, and via CCS port it'll take up to 127.5 kilowatts, and therefore allows you to go from 10 to 80% using an appropriate DC rapid charger like you'd find on the motorway in roughly half an hour. Now, if you were to find a more commonly found DC charger, then with a 50 kilowatt input, it'll take you roughly 55 minutes in the smaller battery pack model and 1 hour and 19 minutes in the larger battery pack model. Now, as for its Type 2 port and connected up to a 3-phase power supply, such as the ones that you'd find around on the street, or indeed if you have 3-phase power supply at a workplace or at home, then you can go from 10 to 100% in 5 hours and 20 minutes in the smaller battery pack model and 7 hours and 15 minutes in the larger battery pack model. As for a 3-pin input, it will take you 23 hours and 10 minutes and 32 hours and 10 minutes respectively. Now, it's also worth pointing out over here that all the EV3s have got bidirectional charging capabilities, which is great for the longevity and the future of electric vehicles. In other words, they'll be able to feed back electricity back to your home or, for example, to the grid. Furthermore, it is also worth highlighting that the GT Line S model has also got vehicle-to-load charging. In other words, you are able to discharge the battery pack using a regular 3-pin input. Useful, for example, if you go camping and you want to power a household appliance or simply want to charge another electric vehicle, albeit at a very slow rate. So moving on from efficiency, let's talk about performance. And yet again, as a reminder, you've got a front-wheel drive configuration only in the EV3s, although an all-wheel drive model will be coming in at a later date. This means using its battery pack and the front-mounted motor, you've got 150 kilowatts of power or 201 horsepower and 283 newton meters of torque. I had it tested using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 2.04 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 3.17 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 7.42 seconds, and 50 to 70 miles an hour in 3.81 seconds. It also recorded a peak acceleration of 0.46 Gs. As for its top speed, it's limited to 105 miles an hour. Now, it's not exactly going to set your world alight, but it should certainly suffice for the vast majority of consumers, specifically given the target demographic of the EV3. Now, if you're going to be putting your foot down to the metal, you will be pleased to know that there is no torque steer or front wheel spin, something that plagued the older generation Kia and Hyundai vehicles due to their higher torque power output. And I'm all for it because it adds to the overall confidence and grip of the EV3 among a few of the latest generation fully electric vehicles from the manufacturers. Now here it is worth considering that you have got dynamic torque vectoring, and it does actually feel pretty responsive while going around winding country routes. The EV3 feels pretty planted, and you've also got very little body lean to worry about, specifically for an electric SUV. However, make no mistake, it still hasn't got that exact one-to-one driver's input. Therefore, in terms of its sport mode preset, you still have a little bit of a disjointed feel with the front axle. And if that's something that you're looking forward to, then you might want to look elsewhere, albeit at a more expensive price tag, with the likes of BMW, Jaguar, Porsche and Audi offering better alternatives. Now, what I do think is going to be of greatest importance is in terms of the overall driving comfort. And here the EV3, in my opinion, has got a slightly stiffened setup. At the front, you've got a MacPherson multi-link configuration, and at the rear, a 5-arm multi-link setup. The combination of this means that while driving around the town and therefore going around potholes, speed bumps or anomalies, I felt that I could hear and feel them a little bit more than I would expect. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not too bad in the grand scheme of things, and I don't think it's going to be bothering a lot of individuals, but when you're comparing and contrasting this vehicle with some of its competitors, including the older generation Kia and Hyundai vehicles, I do think that the EV3 doesn't feel as comfortable as one might expect. Now, another thing that will contribute to the overall driving experience is cabin noise. And here the EV3 isn't exactly the best in its class, but it certainly does do a decent job across the board. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the sound measurements that are recorded within the cabin at different speeds, make sure you check out my detailed audio review that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down the description below or the pinned comments. Now, in terms of its overall interior design, Kia has worked in partnership with a manufacturer in order to get a lot of recycled materials. And that's very much appreciated in terms of a sustainability point of view. However, some might be worried about in terms of the overall feel and the look of the cabin. Well, here, I don't think you should have any sort of complaints. In fact, in my opinion, it actually looks a lot better than the other manufacturers that offer, let's say, a more traditional design. The materials that have been used around the dashboard, the steering wheel, the door frames, in terms of the upholstery, and even in terms of the center console, it just all looks and feels the part. And kudos to Kia for actually really nailing it in this department. Furthermore, I absolutely love the practicality of the vehicle. See, a lot of modern vehicles that I'm sat in often just have all of this infotainment system, and therefore means that everything that you have to control with the vehicle is done via the center display. Well, that's not quite the case. You've still got physical buttons and dials on the steering wheel, traditional stalks, and yes, also a gear selector, which is actually quite intuitive to use with an on and off button, so therefore making it quite nice in terms of jumping in and out of the vehicle. And you've also got a few physical buttons on the center console and by the dashboard. Here you've even got a few dedicated climate control buttons. Speaking of which, there's also a dedicated climate control menu, and it is touch-based. It's a 5.3-inch display that sits between the instrument cluster and the infotainment system, and it gives you all the controls that you want, and you can therefore visualize what you're actually controlling, such as, let's say, the fan speed, or indeed the control of the temperature. You even got a quick access to go to the infotainment system as well, so therefore giving you even further degree of customization. It's just great thinking by the manufacturer, and I really do love what Kia have achieved over here. I've complimented the Hyundai group generally of really implementing good use of technology while preserving practicality, and it's great to see this has actually been translated to the EV3 as well. Speaking of which, the center 12.3-inch display is intuitively laid out and provides you plenty of customization options, which is very much appreciated. It isn't overwhelming either. Furthermore, it's great to see that at a later date you'll have ChatGPT integrated directly via the EV3, allowing you to initiate voice commands. Now, in terms of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, they're both supported over a wired and a wireless transmission, which is very much appreciated. Furthermore, turn-based navigation from these third-party mobile operating systems feeds directly to the 12.3-inch instrument cluster, which is also somewhat customizable. So yes, it means that you can also check the certain turn-based navigation directly via the instrument cluster. If you were to also go for the GT Line S, which is on review, you also have a head-up display. And yet again, this data from the third-party mobile operating systems feeds directly to there as well. Again, allowing you to keep your eyes planted on the road. A lot of other manufacturers do away with the instrument cluster or, for example, the head-up display, such as, for example, what you'd find in the Volvo EX30 or the Tesla alternatives. But it's great to see that Kia have still thought about the overall practicality when it comes to a safety point of view for the driver. On that note, if you do go for the top-spec GT Line S model, you have a pretty punchy 8-speaker Harman Kardon audio system, which has a presumed power output of 320 watts. This is not going to compete, however, with the Kia Soul EV's 10-speaker Harman Kardon audio system, which did a far better job across the sound frequency range, let alone some of its competitors that completely outclass it. However, it is worth considering that it is still a worthwhile upgrade to look at, because if you do not go for the GT Line S model, then you'll have a standard 6-speaker setup instead, which does away with the center driver and the subwoofer. Yet again, there's some more information on my dedicated audio review that you'll be able to find in the description below or the pinned comments. So while considering the different trim levels, you will also want to know that in the GT lines you have got a 15-watt wireless charger, which is positioned at the top of the center console. It's also got a non-slip material which prevents your phone from sliding around. Now, this actually does bring me on to storage, and here you have got the glove box, which has been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles. Then towards the center console and towards the front of it, you've got two USB Type-C ports, one of which can be used for connecting up to the infotainment system, and it can be intelligently switched over to providing charge only if that's something that you want. In other words, if you don't want Android Auto or Apple CarPlay to be operating with the device that's actually being connected. Then you've also got a 12-volt socket, which can be handy, for example, for a dash cam. Now, further down the center console, you have got two retractable cup holders, which is good thinking about the manufacturer, and a very large open area with a non-slip material. Now here it is worth considering that if you do go for the airlines, you will have a sliding storage area which is found by the armrest. If, however, you go for the GT lines, this will be replaced by a little table, effectively allowing you to, for example, place a small little laptop, or let's say if you're having a meal and you're going to just be sitting while charging, then it can be handy in that scenario. However, I do feel that the manufacturer should have kind of combined the both, specifically in the more expensive trims, because while the sliding table can be handy in certain scenarios, I would have liked that concealed storage, which could have been handy while, for example, placing more sensitive goods, for example, if your glove box is full. Now, as for the door bins, the front two have unfortunately not been lined in a sort of fabric or non-slip material, and as a result your loose change and keys will be heard rattling about when you're traversing on uneven terrain. Here you will be able to place a 500ml bottle with some small to medium-sized valuables, while at the rear it's a little bit more limited. You then also have a pull-down armrest compartment which reveals 2 cup holders, and also a small little storage area that's found towards the rear portion of the center console. Here you'll also find 2 USB Type-C ports, one of which is found on each of the inner side of the front seats, and this can be used for providing charge to your rear occupants. Aside from storage within the cabin, what about when it comes to its boot capacity? Well, here you've got 460 litres to play around with, or 1,250 litres if you drop down the seats. It should certainly suffice for your weekly shops, and in comparison to some of the other smaller sized electric SUVs, it actually is pretty good. It's also really practical. You've got a hatchback design which opens up pretty wide, and you've also got an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard across the entire trim range. Then you've got 60/40 rear split folding seats with a completely flat floor. It is worth noting over here that the boot floor is also adjustable, which can be handy in certain scenarios, although it's worth bearing in mind that if you were to adjust it, then you'll no longer have a flat floor, and you'll also be taking away some of the under compartment storage, which can be handy, for example, for taking other goods, such as, let's say, your charging cables. With that said, you have also got a 25-litre front capacity. That's an area that's found underneath the bonnet, and this will pretty much just about allow you to place your charging cables, and that's about it. Now, it is worth noting over here that the front is electronically released, although will be manually closed, so it's not as practical as using the boot. With that in mind, if you do want to expand on storage, you might be wondering about its towing capacity. And here on the Air model with the smaller battery pack, it's rated at 500 kilograms for brake trailers, while the other models, including the larger battery pack Air model, moves over to 1000 kilograms. That isn't exactly great figures to shout home about, because if you compare and contrast it with some of the other electric SUVs, its towing capacity is actually pretty low. However, what really stands out in comparison to its rivals is your overall seating comfort. See here, you've got these really cushiony headrests at the front seats. And yes, this is actually reminiscent of what you'd find in a Maybach and Bentley. And I'm not exaggerating. The EV3 just feels really plush. Furthermore, the seats themselves are very accommodating and soft. And in terms of headroom and legroom, I had no problems whatsoever at the front or at the rear of the cabin. It's also nice to see that the manufacturer has optimized the rear footwell design by keeping it completely flat. No surprise given that the vehicle has been built from the ground up as a fully electric vehicle, but nonetheless it's still great to see. Furthermore, you've also got heated front seats and a heated steering wheel as standard, and this is across the entire trim range. Now, there is manually controlled driver seat and passenger seat, but if you do want this electronically adjustable, you'll have to go for the GT line. If you do want this present for the passenger seat, you'll have to go for the top spec GT Line S. Meanwhile, in the top spec model, you'll also find relaxation seats, a front ventilation function, and rear outer heated seats. Furthermore, you've also got an electronically controlled sunroof and sunshade, which is very much appreciated for those darker days as it draws in some nice light within the cabin. Now, this does actually bring me onto its exterior design, and I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. Now, the manufacturer labels its front with a digital tiger face, which I do find somewhat laughable, but regardless of the marketing term, I do think it's actually pretty stylish. At the front, you have got these headlights that feed seamlessly with the front bumper, and you've also got a nice front grille design. Then, in terms of the side profile, I would have preferred if it had body-collared wheel arches and side skirts, as it wouldn't have had sort of that striking look. However, if you do go for slightly different paint finishes, it can reduce the effect. Here you've also got 17 or 19-inch alloys depending on which trim level you go for, and you've also got the ability of choosing different styles, which will cost you between £263 and £308. So it's good to see that it's not going to set you back a huge amount of money to personalize the look of the Kia EV3. Now, in terms of the colour finishes, it's available as standard in orange, which I do think is a nice touch by the manufacturer, changing the kind of norm that you'll find with black and white only. If, however, you do want a white, black, grey, silver, blue, or the pictured pistachio green, which, by the way, is only available in the GT lines, it'll set you back an additional £625. On that note, I would just like to point out that in the GT lines, the door handles automatically pop out for the front doors, making it a little bit more intuitive to get into the vehicle. And in comparison to, for example, a Tesla, it's far more intuitive. While in terms of the rear doors, the handles themselves are located by the windows. So therefore, it just takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get your head around it, it becomes second nature. So with all that out of the way, what about when it comes to its safety credentials? Well, at the time of filming, it's not been tested by Euro NCAP, so I've got no sort of crash analysis to share with you. However, basing it on my prior experience of looking at the ratings of Kia and Hyundai vehicles, it should actually do pretty well. Now, what I can talk about are the driver assistance systems, and here you've got a whole bunch of them featured as standard across the entire trim range, which is certainly appreciated. You've got blind spot collision avoidance with rear cross traffic collision avoidance, forward collision avoidance, smart cruise control, which actually does a pretty good job of keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle and doesn't feel jerky either, and you can even customize it via the infotainment system. Then you've got highway driving assist, which effectively gives you steering support on the motorway, and it does actually work a treat. Then you've got intelligent speed assist, speed limiter, lane follow assist, lane keep assist, safe exit warning, and driver attention warning. Now, in the GT Line S, you've also got blind spot view monitor, which effectively integrates the side cameras into the instrument cluster, therefore allowing you to check for your blind spot. Really good thinking by the manufacturer, and something that I've commended the Hyundai group before, because it's something absolutely that I would love to see on every single vehicle, because it just adds to the overall safety credentials. Now, one thing I would like to note is that due to the overall safety and the regulations of the vehicle, specifically in European and in the UK, then what you'll find is that all these safety systems become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, which can seem a little bit cumbersome. Thankfully, Kia have thought about it, because you can push and hold the volume dial button in order to disable the speed limit assist and warning. And while if you were to hold down the steering icon, which is found on the steering wheel yet again, you'll be able to disable the lane keep assist, again, until you re-initiate the vehicle, in other words, power it on again. Here, it is also worth considering, however, that if you do want to access some of the menus, for example, if you do also want to disable the driver attention warning, which can be a little bit cumbersome at certain times, then you can actually assign a button on the steering wheel to enable a shortcut to the infotainment system, and then you can quickly disable the certain settings that you want. So the manufacturers really thought about the practicality and the usability of the vehicle, and yet again, it's something that I've seen previously with other vehicles from the Hyundai group, but it's good to see it yet again in the EV3. Similarly, when it comes to maneuverability, the EV3 has a really tight turning circle, and therefore makes it very easy to do a 3-point turn. Furthermore, if you pair that up with the pretty intuitive gear selector that is found by the steering wheel, it makes it actually really quick to do. You've also got front and rear parking sensors and a rear camera that comes fitted as standard across the entire trim range, which is the same that could be said about some of its competitors. If, however, you really want to up the ante, you might want to go for the GT Line S, which adds 360-degree cameras, remote parking assist, and parking collision avoidance assist, all of which are very much appreciated and takes the stress away in order, for example, for preventing you from curbing your rims or indeed from hitting an object. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the Kia EV3. And make no mistake, it's not quite perfect. See, I think it could be a little bit softer on the road. And in terms of its electric range, well, it's not exactly class leading. I was expecting a little bit more from the South Korean manufacturer, specifically given that fact that we've got a larger battery pack over the older generation Niro EV or indeed the Kona EV. Now still, with all things considered, it does tick quite a lot of boxes. It's stylish, at least in my opinion, both inside and out. You've got plenty use of technology, which actually does work a treat, and good use of customization. You've got a pretty spacious cabin and a decent boot capacity, and its overall performance won't exactly set your world alight, but will certainly suffice for the vast majority of consumers. Given all of this and also its overall price tag, I can see myself recommending the EV3 for those people that do want a compact electric SUV, and as such it gets our Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below and how you feel it compares with some of its key competitors, some of which I've reviewed and will be down in the description below for your own consideration. And if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.